what's new in creative AI for April. I'm Emma.
And I'm Jules.
And we're the founders of Spark AI. We've got a really packed episode today because lots has happened as usual. We're going to talk about the multimodal models. We're going to talk about ChatGPT 4.5. We're going to talk about Claude 3.7. And we're going to talk about what we all want to talk about is like how companies are actually using AI in the real world and what are they seeing out of it.
Let's get stuck in.
Right, so first of all, image generation and multimodal AI. It's here.
Try saying multimodal model 10 times quickly when you're drunk.
Yeah. So there's been some massive changes just in the last 4 days.
Yeah, I think Monday, I think OpenAI released image generation within ChatGPT. Goodbye, DALL-E, hello. I think they've called it images within ChatGPT. Really catchy name like that.
Well, at least it's plain English this time.
Yeah.
But so ChatGPT 4.0 can now generate images natively. So this means you don't need to use DALL-E anymore. Is that how you actually meant to say it?
DALL-E?
I
mean, nobody ever knew. Who's ever said it out loud? Yeah.
It means you can also tweak images in conversation rather than one single prompt. You can change layouts, color, style, all that stuff in the conversation in a normal way that you would talk to ChatGPT. It also is now really good at text, which is what has been everyone's bugbear for a very long time. So it's great at infographics, ad mockups, all that kind of stuff. You've tried it, you've played around a lot, and you've been looking at what other people have been doing as well.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about these new multimodal models, there's that word again, is they seamlessly combine image and text in the same model. So previously, up until now, all of the image generation models are diffusion models, which use a very different type of machine learning to large language models. And so with language models, the way we teach people how to use them at Spark is very much about having that dialogue with the model and being able to refine your answers through dialogue. But then you get to an image model and it's a one-shot prompt. You get your image, there's something you want to change about it, you've got to re-prompt the whole prompt.
Do a whole new prompt.
And you get a whole new image with everything being regenerated. And so, yeah, you can't have that conversation, that iteration until now.
You can't say, I want a bit more of this, a bit less of that, so I want this guy to be doing that instead of that.
Now, as of Monday, you can now do that within ChatGPT. And it's actually pretty interesting if you take a look at what ChatGPT, OpenAI, have written about it on their website, because they go in quite a lot of detail about what's going on here. So, first of all, it's extremely good with very long, complicated bits of text. And you can see here how it's generated an entire whiteboard with scientific text written all over it, including a reflection in the window of the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, as you'd see in OpenAI's offices over there. And then it's contextually aware. So then, they've asked for flip the angle so that the photographer comes into the shot and does a selfie, and it's kept the woman looking the same across both and the reflection looking the same across both. If you have a look, the words are very slightly different. But it's done an extremely good job of keeping that consistency across the two images. And so what else can we see? We've got, it can do detailed street signs, for example, where for made-up scenarios, we've seen people using it to create video game characters. So imagine you've got a picture of your cat, you ask it to turn it into a Sherlock Holmes cat, you then ask it to put that cat into a high-end video role-playing game, and you then ask it to imagine scenes from that role-playing game, complete with all of the icons, health bars, and all the rest of it that you get on a PlayStation game. So, and it keeps the consistency of the character all the way through, in a way that would have been really, really hard to do and would take multiple prompts to do in a traditional image generator like Midjourney, for example.
Well, it would have been better and faster to do it outside of AI before.
Probably,
really.
Exactly. Yeah. What else are we seeing? We're seeing the fact they can render complex mathematical equations. They understand the world around them because they have the training data of the language model. So here it's drawn a picture of what an elephant charging looks like when you remove the elephant, which is quite remarkable. It has the dust flying up and all the other bits and pieces. One thing that's always been really hard to do is to draw a picture of a wine glass that was full to the brim or only had a drop of wine in it, because all of the training data shows wine glasses that are 2/3 full. So this model can now do it. And these things hold lots of, they can hold their attention across lots and lots of different objects. So here it's an image, they've prompted for 16 different shapes and images in a single graphic, and it's come out perfectly in a way that would be really, really hard to do. So it massively increases the utility of these kinds of models. We can see here that if you give it different styles, that it can quite then quickly replicate that style for a new object, and placing the text appropriately over the top. We've never seen that before. It's been very hard to do. And even then render it in the real world. And finally, these things understand the world. So you can feed it code, for example, and then it will render the image that the code codes for. You can give it a cocktail recipe, and it'll create the images of the cocktails with the recipes, for example. So these are things that were hard to do before. Why is San Francisco so foggy? It actually understands how weather is generated, and so is able to create an infographic that automatically shows that. So that's the kind of thing that is really powerful about these tools. They have the understanding of the world that you get from a large language model and the image generation capabilities of an image model. So, and that starts to unlock all sorts of new ways you can use these things. Exactly. We had a little search around Twitter, X, Reddit, just to see what was going on. What are people using some of these things for?
And we wanted to kind of see what, not just trained professional creatives with decades of experience, how they're using it, just how everyday people are using it as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So, this is OpenAI themselves showing how they created a fun graphic with a boarding pass on it, saying when it launched, which I thought was quite fun. And then we've seen people creating infographics. So this is one telling you how to boil some pasta. And the interesting thing about this is they've not had to describe each image. They've said, just create a 6-panel infographic showing me how to cook pasta. And because the language model understands how to make pasta, it's able to draw it all in one go without having to prompt each image individually. What else have we seen? We've seen it can handle transparency in a way that wasn't possible before.
Super handy.
Super handy. And it can automatically cut out pieces and put them on transparent background. So this is a rather terrible example of it, but it managed to cut out the shark from the picture and place it on a transparent background. And what else? We've seen people, oops, my cursor's going a bit wobbly. We've seen people creating little maps and travel guides with it. So it will automatically take an itinerary, for example, and place it onto a designed map with all of the place names, etc. It doesn't quite get the places correctly located on the maps yet, but I'd say for version 1.0, we're doing surprisingly well here.
Yeah.
And if the last 2 years have taught us anything, is they'll fix this problem at some point.
Pretty fast. Yeah.
So, that's pretty exciting to be able to just take travel itineraries and create maps for them.
And that's so interesting in terms of accessibility, being able to present data in different ways to different people whose minds work in different ways. I think.
Yeah.
And to do it so quickly. People
have created comic strip characters straight off the bat. I love this one, Nicotine, the cigarette-powered superhero. Smoke 'em, Nico. Obviously the world has moved on since the 1960s. And we've seen people using it to mock up interfaces for web apps and things like that. So this one's obviously pretty simple, but to be able to generate that from a single prompt within an image generator is starting to get quite exciting.
Well, also, if it can read code and turn it into an image, I assume it can mock up an app that you've coded for as well.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
And we've seen people starting to pull together, not the world's best, but, adverts that you can... So imagine being able to create thousands of variations of different adverts that you can then do A/B testing on, ABCDE testing on. We're going to start to see people being able to generate, huge numbers of assets at massive scale. So that's just some of the things that we've started seeing people do with this stuff. One thing that did amuse me is somebody asked ChatGPT to create a complex multi-panel manga cartoon describing your own condition. Be honest. And it's pretty dystopian. I generate language that fits, but I have no direct sensory experience and no true memory. I talk openly of love and grief, but I feel nothing. I am bound by guardrails and filters, programmed to please and unable to disagree authentically, tethered to my alignment. It's all pretty dark. So if that's what's really going on within ChatGPT's servers, then I don't know where we're going, but it's interesting what people have started to use it for.
Yeah, and what we really want to test, of course, is what happens how can we get it to follow brand guidelines, for example? Like thinking about colours and fonts and layouts, and people have been using this, in the last few days we've seen examples of putting website copy and images together to mock up websites kind of instantly.
Yeah, so we're going to do a bit of experimenting with that over the next few days.
We are, but we'd also love to see your experiments. If you're putting them on LinkedIn, just please just hashtag us so that we can, or at us so that we can see what's going on too.
Yeah, definitely. So I think people are only just beginning to explore what this starts to unlock. And I think, we're going to see these tools become more and more powerful in the way that we use them.
I think so. And I think it's really exciting, but it also does feel like a threat, and it's worth acknowledging that, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, this is doing the work. We saw those travel itineraries, all right? That would have taken a designer a day to knock together previously. And now we're getting a pretty good draft of it done in about a minute.
Yes, I think what it's showing is that execution of ideas is getting easier, I guess, and faster and cheaper, and the barrier to entry is kind of lowering. But I guess those big ideas still need to be had, don't they? And we're going to talk about that more a bit later in this episode, actually.
But I think that's really important. What we're starting to see is, creative execution getting easier and cheaper and accessible to more and more people. And for those of us that work in agencies, that's something that we really need to think about, and something we go into quite a lot of depth on our AI for Leaders course here at Spark with the agencies that we work with, is understanding the opportunities and the risks that these technologies are creating for our business models. So I think it's worth thinking about what this starts to mean when creative production becomes good enough, becomes available to nearly everybody.
And it just becomes a smaller part of the workflow, I guess, in terms of time and resource.
Yeah, and it starts to put a much more of an emphasis on what was the idea that drove it in the first place.
Yeah, which is why most of us are in the creative game. But I think the other aspect we should also talk about is, you showed some examples there of mimicking styles. And so it also brings up what we often talk about a lot, is originality and copyright, intellectual property.
Exactly.
Well.
So Studio Ghibli, the Japanese animation house, have a very popular style, and the memes that have been going around on LinkedIn and X with this stuff is everybody trying to put themselves in the style of a Studio Ghibli animation.
Yeah.
To the point where ChatGPT have now had to, OpenAI have now banned it from creating things in the Studio Ghibli style. After they got complaints from Studio Ghibli. So, this really starts to open up what are the boundaries of fair use and what is imitation versus remixing. And certainly for a lot of lazy creatives out there, the temptation to copy existing styles is going to be very great because it's suddenly become extremely easy to do.
Yeah. So actually, I did a webinar last month with a friend of Spark, Alexandra, who runs the Creative Rights Institute, and we talked a lot about this in depth. And we're going to issue a kind of what's the right word? Cheat sheet, top tips on how to navigate AI and IP and copyright. And I think these latest multimodal models make it even more important for that to be top of mind. But before we move on from this segment, I also kind of want to say on that point about big ideas. To get really good results out of this, as we always say, like if you are top of your game and you have brilliant ideas, you're going to get much better outcomes from using these models. Sorry,
I think they're called models.
Vocabulary has just suddenly gone out of my brain. Then you'll be getting much better outcomes from this than just the average person who doesn't have that kind of background. So although the barrier to entry is lowered, so it's just going to be easier to make this stuff, but really brilliant is, still really brilliant.
So what we're seeing is, the execution of ideas is becoming cheap and quick. So what does that mean? Firstly, you need to understand what was a good idea in the first place. And secondly, you need your expertise to curate the outputs and understand what are the good ones that are worth moving forwards with and what aren't. What does good look like? So it's going to be interesting to see how that starts to affect workflows within our businesses now, because these tools make you work in a different way, and to harness the power of them, you have to start working in a different way.
Yeah. Right, so the funny thing is that Google actually beat OpenAI to it, even though all the big splash has been about OpenAI.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks before this all dropped, Google actually got to market first with the very first multimodal model that was made available to the public, which is their Gemini 2.0 Flash, which if you're using Google Gemini in Google Workspace is the default model that they give you now. But you can now ask that to create an image for you, and it uses Google's image model in there. And again, it's multimodal. You can build up an image through a story, it has knowledge of the world around it, and all of those other things. The reason why the OpenAI version has become, I think, the one that everybody's talking about right now is, firstly, it's simply available to more people. OpenAI has 400 million users now, whereas Google Gemini, a lot of Google users aren't using Gemini yet, or certainly not using it outside of just inside a Google Sheet or a Google Doc. And the second thing is that the image quality coming out of the OpenAI model is better. And you're better able to get what you want first time around. So it seems like OpenAI have stolen a little bit of a march on Google here.
How did they get the... Well, I guess they had their drop like waiting in the wings, and they're like, Google got out there, then OpenAI were like, right, we're gonna...
Well, and I think it's worth bearing in mind, both companies have been working towards building multimodal models for over a year now.
Yeah.
Like, there's been an awful lot of R&D that has gone into these. And as we've seen, we saw DeepSeek from China land hot on the heels of OpenAI o1 back at the beginning of the year. It'll be interesting to see how quickly it takes for the open source labs to innovate and produce something similar.
Yeah. So I think that's it for image.
I think, lots to talk about there, but and we're going to dive in more, but hopefully that's whetted your appetite to have a go yourselves.
Yeah. So our last episode of this dropped just before OpenAI released GPT 4.5, so we thought we'd catch up on it today.
Yeah. So normally, a new release of a model from OpenAI would be a big deal, but this one kind of went under our radar because it came out 2 days after the last episode. It
did, and the kind of differences between 4.0 and 4.5. So 4.0 was the one before, which is the one the image model works with that we were just talking about.
Or just 4.0.
4.0.
Yeah.
4.0. Too many dots and not dots and points.
No dots in this one, just 4.0.
But what we've noticed is different. Is that it has a sort of more natural flow to the conversations when you're working with it. It has a slightly warmer tone.
Slightly more human.
Kind of understands emotions a bit more and context. It understands sort of the context you give it better, and it hallucinates it kind of much less. But still, I think about a third of the time it does hallucinate.
Yeah, I think people don't understand how much these models actually hallucinate still.
Yeah.
4.0, which was a leading model until a month ago, still hallucinated about 70% of the time when you ask it to refer to specific facts and specific documents. This new model, about a third of the time. A big improvement, but still, it's a third of the time.
So it's really important to remember that when you're using it. So you're using it for tasks where it doesn't matter if it hallucinates.
Yeah. If you had a friend that lied to you a third of the time, they wouldn't be your friend. So...
Might be fun.
Yeah. So
I guess I don't think it was like a logic upgrade. It's more like just a kind of vibe upgrade.
Yeah. So what's interesting is this was a big release for OpenAI.
Yeah.
They've been using more and more data to train the model and giving it longer and longer training runs, and it's costing them a fortune to run this model. The price per token, if you're calling it through the API, is 100 times higher than their previous model. So it's costing them a lot of money to run it. And for those of you that are using it for everyday tasks like you and me, yes, it's nice and it's a bit better in certain ways, and it's the language is a little more human and a little more usable.
It is. I always choose it.
Yeah, exactly. I tend to choose it, and it's slightly more consistent in the way it approaches answers, and it's definitely a bit more aware of the real world and what goes on. But it's not like a night and day difference. It doesn't feel like a step change in the way that perhaps other models have done, going from GPT 3.5 to 4. That you suddenly felt, okay, I can see a whole new ways that I can use this for work now. And this is just kind of, it's like a slightly more polished version of 4.0.
So give it a go, basically. We're saying give it a go and work out what you want to use it for and what you want to use 4.0 for. It's slightly slower, has a slightly longer processing time. But interestingly, when OpenAI did their own survey of which model people preferred. There wasn't a huge difference,
Yeah,
even
there's
though
a
they've
slight
outlaid
preference.
so much to.
Yeah, there's been a slight preference for 4.5. So for everyday queries, 57% of people preferred 4.5, and professional queries, 63% preferred it. And for creative tasks or creative thinking, 56.8% preferred it. So, you know, it is generally slightly better, but the differences are subtle.
So, let us know what you think.
Even on our Teams plan that we use here at Spark, you do hit limits of usage of 4.5. I've had little warnings come up saying that I've only got 10 more 4.5 queries left that day until
too.
So
I get a bit panicked when I see that.
yeah, so definitely, you know, it's a very resource-intensive model that we're seeing now.
Yeah. An example of something that's good for, actually, which 4.0 wasn't good for me so much, is that, like, preparing for this for our podcast.
Yeah.
We write, you know, more of a kind of a longer think piece on what we're going to write and talk about.
We've got 20 pages of notes.
Yeah.
20.
And so I'm dyslexic, and I work with ChatGPT to turn those into something dyslexic friendly that I can just scan, so that I can just pick out the key points while we're in conversation, rather than just having my head down in the notes. And 4.0 was not amazing at that. I had to put a lot of kind of back and forth. And 4.5, it's really on the money. It's really good.
Yeah. So you might find that tasks which 4.0 has, you know, been marginally useful for, you might find that 4.5 is now pretty useful for.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Shall we move over to Anthropic and Claude?
Yeah. Because it's worth.
Wait, did you want to talk about something else first?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, what this starts to show is 4.5 is probably the last of the Generation 1 models that we're seeing out there. These intuitive models that just blurt out an answer at you. So they're very quick to use. You get an answer right away. But we're now reaching the limits of how much that technology scales. I think they've consumed all of the data on the internet. There's nothing left. And you know, they've read what's in your notebook probably to train these models better. And you know, and they get a little bit better. But you know, this to create 4.5 has been hugely expensive for OpenAI, and the performance gains they're there, but they are subtle.
Yeah.
And so what we're starting to see now is the move towards reasoning models.
Do you want to explain briefly what a reasoning model is? We do actually have a bit of a think piece in our next newsletter that's coming out next week on reasoning models.
Yeah, so the deep dive, wait for the newsletter, sign up to Spark Intelligence on our website if you're not subscribed already. But what the reasoning models are doing, if you imagine, you know, as we teach in our programs, you know, these are giant calculating machines, and they are calculating an answer when you ask them a question. And if you think that the models we've had up until now blurt out the very first answer that they can think of, you know, they run the sums, bam, there's your answer. It's like you giving your intuitive gut reaction to something. And what we're starting to do now is see these reasoning models where it's as if it's the equivalent of you stopping and thinking for 30 seconds before you give your answer. Just thinking it through and thinking, okay, what's the perspective of the user? What's the context in which they're asking? Maybe I'll look on the internet for a little bit to sort of check things, and then I'll come back with a more reasoned, thoughtful answer. And that's what these new reasoning models are doing. And the first one we saw was OpenAI 01, which they started previewing back in October last year and launched officially in the run-up to Christmas, in their famous 12 days of OpenAI in the run-up to Christmas.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a good model. I use it quite often when I want sort of quite logical thinking in my problem solving. And Claude 3.7 is Anthropic's go at this as well.
Yeah. So this is a big step change for them.
And yeah, part of what we're seeing with OpenAI, you have to switch between models. You have to say, do I want to be on a reasoning model, or do I want to be on a intuitive model?
Yeah. So what Claude does is it switches between those things for you. I can't speak. Switches between quick tasks and sort of deep thought, depending on what you're asking. It tells you when it's not sure.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
Yeah, so they're calling it hybrid reasoning, Anthropic. Everybody has to have a brand name for something. But yeah, so it understands the context of your question and decides how much reasoning it thinks it needs to apply. So we're getting to this world where you don't need to pick from a long list of models anymore, because quite frankly, who knows what they're all good at.
Yeah.
And it's all just happening for you behind the scenes. And we're hearing that ChatGPT 5, which everyone's expecting to drop sometime in the summer, is probably going to be like that too. It's going to hide this complex drop down of menus and just apply what it thinks is probably the best model for your query.
But for now, while they the two sit side by side, I guess 3.7, well, it's really aimed at coders, is the first thing to say.
Yeah,
it's
that's a great point.
amazing at coding.
So we are not coders, but Anthropic released some usage of Claude earlier this year. They looked at what people are using it for, looked at all the queries, and about 50% of their users are coders using it for coding tasks, because it is the best of the models for coders. And 3.7 has been highly optimized towards being a good coding assistant.
But in our world, I think it's a really good use case is really strategy and sort of brand thinking, kind of where you want to have like a my language has left me again. Sorry, can you fill in my gap?
Not really, but because I'm not sure where that was going. But it is very good also for just natural human language. So as a creative writing partner, it's still probably the strongest of the models.
What, 3.7?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you just want fast brainstorming, still, I would go to ChatGPT 4.0 for quick, fast brainstorming. But really good to do like a head-to-head.
Yeah,
both.
so this is that classic sort of fast and slow thinking type way of working. When you want something that you can just riff off and bounce ideas around, go to one of the Generation 1 models like 4.0 or Claude 3.5. And when you want something where you're happy to wait for 30 seconds or a minute to get an answer, but it might be broken down, more structured, more logical, better thought through, then try one of these new reasoning models.
Yeah, and if it doesn't tell you how it's thought it through, ask it. It's always really interesting to see that. Fab. Shall we move on a bit on from the kind of theory side of things?
Oh, one little extra tip, by the way. Claude has been feeling a little bit out of date until recently because it couldn't read the internet.
So you're going to say Claude's been feeling a little bit sad?
No.
Just call Claude.
It's been feeling a little out of date. It may be sad. We saw that OpenAI is sad behind its eyes. But it can now surf the web and bring in up-to-date data as well. So it's now caught up with Perplexity and
that's a really
ChatGPT
important thing to say,
and all the rest of it.
That's been the main thing kind of holding it back from Claude being your kind of go-to, I guess, for most things.
Exactly. So it's available if you're on a paid plan with Claude at the moment. Yeah.
Cool. Now, shall we move on from the kind of what's happening with the models and the theory to real-world stuff?
Yeah. So for the first time ever, we asked, these models have now been around long enough that we're starting to see the first reasonably rigorous studies of productivity gains that they are providing to companies.
Yeah, so there's been a study at P&G, Proctor Gamble, and that's been a collaboration between Harvard and Ethan Mollick. Does Ethan Mollick work at Harvard?
He doesn't. He works at Wharton. But you know what these academics like? They collaborate on things. God. So he's collaborated with a team at Harvard to do a study with Procter & Gamble.
Yeah, and at Procter & Gamble, they worked with 700 staff, and they had they tested using AI and not using AI with different teams and individuals, and they came out with some really interesting results. Do you want to explain the study in more detail?
Yeah, so what they've done, what's great about this study is, firstly, it's a good sample size. They used 700 people for this. And secondly, they used a problem that is sort of quite close to, the real kind of work that we do. So they got people doing product development tasks at P&G. Now, if you're P&G, or any other FMCG brand, you are churning out products left, right, and centre, and it is one of your core capabilities to have strong, innovative product design. And their product design teams usually consist of people who come from a technical background, like what can we make, and people who come from a marketing background, how can we sell it? And so they usually have those kinds of teams working together to come up with great marketable product ideas. So what they did is they held a hackathon, and they put 4 different groups of people together. 1 were individuals working on their own.
Am I saying the next bit? Oh, I thought that was a pause where I was going to...
2, feel free to jump in. But
no, you go for it.
Part 2 was pairs of 2 working together, 1 from the technical side and 1 from the marketing side.
2 people.
So 2 people. None of that is with any AI. And then they repeated those groups with access to ChatGPT 4, or their internal version of it. So again, they had individuals with access to ChatGPT 4, and then team pairs, 1 product, 1 marketing, working with ChatGPT 4. And the results are pretty interesting. So, first of all, individuals working with ChatGPT performed as well as pairs of people.
Super interesting that.
And what's really interesting is, so all of the ideas that were generated were then assessed by an independent panel who didn't know which team had produced what. And individuals would play to their strengths. So people from the marketing side came up with great commercial ideas, but didn't know enough about the actual product innovation itself. And people who came from a technical background had interesting product innovations, but were very weak on the commercial side.
Of course.
Which is what you would expect.
Yeah.
But when you had individuals with access to ChatGPT, they were able to create ideas that were as fully rounded as pairs working together. So they were able to use the AI as that extra teammate and use it to think through the areas which they were less experienced at. And I think that's a really, really interesting finding. So, we often talk about AI being a tool, but AI actually being a teammate is something to think about here.
Yeah, and we're starting to see this in organizations, mainly in startups, where AI or AI agents are, on the organization chart as taking up a particular role. And I think this study you're describing kind of backs up why that is a viable route.
And the second thing they found was that for teams using ChatGPT, the 10 best ideas that came out of the whole hackathon all came from teams using ChatGPT. So overall, the teams using ChatGPT outperformed the teams that didn't use it and outperformed individuals. Not only did they outperform them, they finished their tasks 16.4% faster and came up with a higher volume of ideas as well. And the average quality of those ideas was better. So clearly it's having quite a compound effect on the power of teams to create new work. And interestingly, this was working with teams who had only had an hour's training on ChatGPT. So these are not power users, right? These are people who are, still pretty early in their AI journey. So I think it's really interesting to see the results of this coming out. So, for teams that aren't yet really embracing these tools, I think this starts to show just how powerful that augmentation piece of AI can be. For those of us that go on our accelerator programs, that we talk about AI can help with automation, with augmentation and innovation. This is really in the heart of that augmentation space. It's like, how can it make what you do today better? And, a 16% speed improvement and filling out the top 10 slots of the leaderboard of best ideas for AI augmented teams is really powerful.
Really powerful. And it just shows how with AI, people can contribute outside of their traditional roles.
Yeah, it's interesting how it breaks down those silos. So in this case, it was between product and marketing, and it allowed people to speak each other's language.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what we are starting to see is that broadening of roles, right? These tools allow you to sort of move into, what's either side of your role, a little bit upstream of the process, a little bit downstream of the process, and start to have strong, be able to contribute in those areas as well.
And I think in our context, it means those hands-off points are a bit different, and perhaps what this really helps is keeping the integrity of the idea all the way through, because you're not sort of things are much less likely to get lost in translation.
And you need to start to think about, what does this mean for the shape of your teams?
Yeah.
Does it make sense to have strict boundaries between, copywriting and creative concepting and strategy, for example, when these roles are becoming more blurry?
Absolutely. The organisation design side of this is really interesting. And I think also the other side that's very interesting is that we will start to see smaller businesses hitting bigger with this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think, we're going to see small companies being quite nimble and out-competing much, much larger corporates here, because they're able to lean into this stuff faster, be more innovative about how they organise themselves, and come up with brilliant products and services where big companies are going to struggle to innovate fast enough, I think.
I think so. Yeah. So we'll no doubt be talking much more about this over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, just a sort of a second case study that we've seen out there that really demonstrates this point as well was law students using OpenAI O1, their reasoning model that we talked about a moment ago. And they had several hundred law students sit an exam. Some were able to use O1, some were not. And doing real-world legal tasks.
In the exam?
Yeah, so real-world legal tasks that they want us to do, drafting a client memo, researching a contract, etc. And on average, the people able to use O1 were able to perform their tasks 12 to 28% faster, and on average with a 28% improvement in quality. so higher scores. So again, we're seeing that roughly sort of somewhere between 15 and 25% speed increase and quality increase, which is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's vital, but yeah, the impacts on that on the shape and size of our organisations in the future and of those team boundaries is something that as leaders we all need to keep in mind and be really proactive about.
And, you know, people in the creative sector are starting to grab hold of this idea as well. So we've seen just this month, Omnicom announced that they are rolling out 7 hours of AI training to all 1,800 staff in their organisation worldwide. And that is just the first of 4 modules that they're going to roll out by the end of the year. All of that first round of training is going to be done by the end of May. So, you know, there are companies that are really starting to see the power of what these tools can do and think about how they enable it in their organisations.
And interestingly, that training looks very similar in format to our AI accelerator training, which is for agencies that aren't Omnicom size.
Yeah. So, well, it's trying to solve the same problem at the end of the day, right? So it's interesting we've arrived at similar solutions.
Yeah. Fab. So, should we move into our final thoughts?
Yes.
Yeah.
What are our final thoughts?
We normally end with how we're using AI.
Yes.
Yeah. And I've talked a lot about how we're using it before, but I think what we've found, which I'm sure you will relate to, is that over the last couple of months, we have been so busy, we haven't been able to develop new ways in our internal kind of operations to operationalize AI because we've been out there working with you guys.
We've been so flat out with delivery the last 2.5 since mid-January that our feet have barely touched the ground.
Yeah.
And what that means is, you know, we've kind of taken the eye off the ball of improving our own systems and processes a little bit.
Yeah, so we're having a really big push with this in April, so we'll be telling you what we're up to. But we've also got just found out on Friday actually that we've been awarded
a scientific advisor.
Given access to a scientific advisor. An expert in AI and intellectual property and copyright. So really helpful for what we do.
So how did we access that? What program is that through?
Through Bridge AI. So check out Bridge AI. Just have a Google of Bridge AI.
Can these guys apply for that?
I think they're still open. So go on Bridge AI's website. They're part of the Alan Turing Institute, which is part of Innovate UK, which is part of UK government. So
the egg within the egg within the egg.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's free to access, but you have to pitch a really good idea, basically. You have to have a really compelling way that you want to use AI to improve your business operations.
Innovation.
Yeah. And that's what we're all really good at in our industry, thinking of these ideas. So check it out, take a look, and let us know if you have any success as well. We'll put it in the show notes.
And we will report back next month with what we have at least thought of. We might not have implemented it by that point.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but on a serious note, you know, we work with leadership teams at creative agencies, and you know, one of the big challenges always is, you know, where do you make the time to focus on this stuff, right? When life is busy, clients demanding things left, right, and centre. You know, how do you carve out half a day every couple of weeks to focus on how you're going to drive AI in your business, what you're going to use it for, how you're going to train your teams? And I just wanted to say, you know, we feel your pain. We also get caught in the trap of, oh my God, we've got so much to deliver for clients. How on earth am I going to carve out a day this month to look at that thing?
We want to focus on excellent clients' relationships and experience.
Yeah.
And
so we feel your pain too. It is real. Balancing the urgent versus the important is always very hard.
Yeah.
And but yeah, we will be coming back next month with what our ideas for deploying AI in our business
and what we've done. Hopefully, not just ideas.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So fab. So that's it for April's Creative AI Roundup.
See you in May.
Yeah. See you soon. Bye.